Here we go again.
No, not again.
You've been fooled.
How long have we been doing this?
Once more unto the
Again, until we're both dead.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews and connections in mind. Solo, a Star Wars story, has hit theaters as the second spin-off Star Wars story since Disney took over Lucasfilm, and it stars Alden Ehrenreich as the titular Han Solo, Woody Harrelson as his mentor, and Emilia Clarke as his love interest, and it's after a troubled production, it finally settled on being directed by Ron Howard, and this is essentially the origin story of Han Solo as we know him. This is set approximately 10 years before the events of Episode 4, A New Hope, and we get to see how Han Solo ended up becoming the most feared, the best scoundrel and the best pilot of the galaxy. Now, this movie review will contain spoilers of Solo, as well as certain other films. There'll be a full list in the description below. And if you have not seen Solo yet, or any of the films listed below, and want to wait until you have, stop the video at this point and come back later. Both these things in mind, though, let's begin. So one of the things that Solo set out to establish is how Han got his name, because it wasn't enough for him to be just called Han Solo that we know of. It turns out Han Solo is a made-up name, and he's given this name by the Imperial Recruitment Officer on Corellia as Han is trying to escape the planet. And while I don't really like this reveal, it is now technically part of Star Wars canon, and there are other famous people, heroes, that have been given their names out of circumstance or convenience. The most one example of which would be Wonder Woman, in which Diana gets her pseudonym Diana Prince from Steve Trevor when she's trying to explain her full actual title of Princess of Themyscira, and Steve cuts her off and says that her name is Diana Prince, and that is, of course, her name from the comics and the original TV series, so there's an example there. Also, this film establishes that Solo originally had a love interest in Emilia Clarke as Kira, a woman who is forced to be left behind on Corellia as Han has to enlist in the Imperial Flight Academy and eventually is drafted into the infantry 3 years after that, and he wants to go back and find Kira, and it turns out he rediscovers her in the employ of Crimson Dawn, which is a mercenary faction, and she is the leader of Crimson Dawn's lieutenant. And this is reminiscent of Fantastic Four, the original one from 2005, in which Reed Richards discovers that Susan Storm is under the employ of Victor Von Doom in the opening scenes of that film. Solo also goes to the trouble of establishing who essentially taught him the ways of the smuggler and the outlaw type. In Solo, it is Woody Harrelson's character of Tobias Beckett, who is a rogue character who essentially takes Han under his wing and teaches him everything he knows, but near the film's finale, he ends up betraying Han for profit and essentially rejecting better ideals in that sense. Now, this is very reminiscent of Titan AE, in which Kale is adopted by Corso, who knew his father. He essentially took him under his wing. Corso needed Kale for a job in order to find the Titan, but Kale thinks that Corso is trying to find the Titan in order to save humanity, but in reality he's trying to find the Titan in order to sell it to the Dredge. So there's a moment when they finally find the Titan where Corso ends up betraying Kale. So there's an interesting comparison there. Now, in the trailers of Solo, we get to see an exciting train scene in which, and in the movie, it's revealed that there's a shipment of hyperfuel on this train, and Tobias Beckett and his crew, including Han and Chewbacca, are drafted to trying to steal this cargo, and things go wrong along the way there. And of course, this isn't the only film with a film or TV series with a train heist in it. But since it's in the sci-fi genre and we're dealing with outlaws here, I'd be remiss to not mention that this is reminds me very much of the second episode of Firefly, The Train Job, which the execution of the both train jobs is actually very similar. Finally, in the beginning of this film, we see Han Solo engaging in a speeder chase from the person who essentially raised Han and Kira. This gangster on Corellia, she finds runaways and as children, and then uses them for her own benefit. Han ends up betraying this gangster, and him and Kira go and hop into a speeder that Han also stole, and thus ensues a great speeder chase throughout the streets of Corellia. And there are two things that come to mind when I see this scene. One, there's a brief shot of that lingers on the during the speeder chase in which Han and Kira are looking at each other as and we see it through the way the angle is set up in the speeder as they're going down these streets. It's very reminiscent of, at least in my opinion, the end of the theatrical version of Blade Runner, which stars Harrison Ford, and since Harrison Ford played Han Solo as well as Deckard in Blade Runner, it's a loose connection, but I think it's a little homage that Ron Howard decided to put in there. And also during this scene, the speeder that Han is piloting is headed towards a gap in this industrial complex somewhere. It's too thin for the speeder to get through normally, but what Han does is he tilts the speeder so that it's going through at an angle, essentially skiing on one side of the speeder. Now, if anyone's ever seen Diamonds Are Forever with Sean Connery as James Bond, you'll know that there's a very similar sequence in which James Bond has to get through an alleyway, and he ends up skiing this Mustang through a very narrow alleyway, and he ends up making it through it. Unfortunately, Han's speeder does not make it all the way through in that one, but it's a very interesting comparison nonetheless. Now, with all this being said, of course, if you haven't already seen Solo, and if these things haven't turned you off, the question remains is, should you go see Solo, A Star Wars Story in theaters? I say in theaters because I would say it's worth seeing, but not in theaters. Here's why. There was a lot of bad press going into Solo, mainly with things like the original director, Lord Miller, being fired by Kathleen Kennedy, Alden Ehrenreich, the star, apparently needing a acting coach, which, by the way, a lot of great actors use acting coaches, so it's not just him who used it. And it's just a very troubled production, and there was a lot of bad press saying, like, this is going to be a terrible film. I would say it's not a terrible film. There's a lot of great things in this film. The strongest point I would say is exploring Han's relationship with Kira and how that would influence him later in life. But all that being said, though, really no one gets great character development at all. Not even Han, really. I mean, we should get to see where he gets his name, where he gets his blaster, how he gets the Falcon, how he meets Chewie. But other than that, it's like he doesn't really change all that much between the beginning of the film and the end. And of all the things that happen in this film, it's very generic. It's not very memorable at all, and it really just seems kind of blah in most respects. And what good things that happen are offset by some kind of annoying things. Like, as I mentioned earlier, the reveal of how Han got his name is just so stupid the way they did it. And the way it's presented in the movie, the actor playing the Imperial recruitment officer almost breaks the fourth wall in essence. It just goes, huh? You see, he's Han Solo, get it? And so that was kind of annoying. And near the very end, I think that it really doesn't matter so much to the plot of the movie so much at all, actually, but it's more of a fan service thing. But it really just kind of irks me that the person who is behind all of these factions and the real person who's employing Crimson Dawn to do all these things is Darth Maul. And I know that he got resurrected in the Clone Wars TV series, but to me, I don't really care about that, and I just kind of annoying that if you didn't see the Clone Wars series, then it would be very confusing if you just watched the movies to find the guy who got cut in half at the end of Phantom Menace suddenly showing up out of the blue for no reason, and it just seems very Disney-esque in trying to build a universe that way. It just fails miserably, in my opinion. It didn't need to be there. I think it detracts from it, but that's just me. I'll definitely go buy this film when it comes out, but if you haven't seen Solo already, I would say wait until it is available on VOD and rent it and check it out, and then see for yourself. I would say even the prequels that are like bad in their own ways, they're at least watchable, and they're at least memorable in that respect. In Solo, I would say it's probably the first just average Star Wars movie. When Star Wars ceases to be special, since there's only been 5 months between Solo's release and Last Jedi, that's kind of a bad thing for me. So I don't know about this one. So I wouldn't say don't go see it, but then again, I can't recommend you go see it as well. So, at least in theaters. So, there's my review of Solo, a Star Wars story. I hope you appreciate it. I appreciate whatever audience I can get. And just remember, there's nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before.